Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm CJ Vogel, joined as always by Rod Babers. This would normally be the preview for the upcoming week's game on Saturday. However, Texas is on a bye week, which means we get to go off script a little bit here, Rod, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the NFL draft. And, well, Texas had a lot of momentum earlier this year with 11 players drafted, already off to a hot start. You're number number 2 in the country. You're 5-0 through 5 weeks. And looking at this roster, Rod, it certainly feels like there's going to be a number of guys drafted already. Before we get into that, of course, take you through what this video is going to be. We're going to look at some guys that have, kind of held up their end of the bargain of draft hype coming into the year, some guys who might have surprised, as well as guys who maybe have left some meat on the bone in terms of what their draft prediction or kind of reputation was coming into the season would be. And, of course, big picture wise, looking ahead to spring 2025 and what that number might end up looking like for Texas in the NFL draft. But Rod, to pitch it to you real quick, Texas, number 2 in the country, 5-0, a lot of veterans that could be draftable next year. It feels like there's going to be a lot of fun in the years to come for the Texas Longhorns in the NFL draft.
Yeah, Sark's got this thing rolling, right? I think it surprised some folks last year with how many guys ended up getting drafted. Guys like Jay Witt and guys like, Quinn Robinson, who we didn't expect to be. We didn't know if they were going to end up getting drafted. They got drafted. So now I think, people are going to be looking at this Texas roster. They have faith now in the development aspect of it. Texas used to be a place where NFL scouts would go for kind of undrafted free agents, guys who were underdeveloped, not being developed, guys who had really high ceilings because they came in as blue chips. But unfortunately, there was a disconnect and Texas couldn't develop that talent. Now you have the opposite happening. You have Texas taking guys who didn't necessarily, project as draftable guys, but the NFL saying, no, actually, Keelan Robinson, yeah, we think you can play for us. You can play in this league. Guys like Ryan Watts is like, Ryan Watts, you can play. We like your frame. You know what? We see potential there. So I think it's just a total shift in the narrative with Texas, and it's all because of Sark and staff. They've done a great job.
Yeah, what's funny is, you could probably look at Jordan Whittington having played the same number of games in college last year for the Longhorns versus with the Rams this year in his rookie year, and he's going to have more production there just because of the role that he was asked about and the Rams taking a chance on him in the draft. It's pretty unique, and I think that there are a number of guys already right now that are kind of showcasing that too. Rod, I wanted to start with this. And coming into this year, Texas probably had 2.5, 3 guys maybe that were getting that first-round recognition. Obviously, that was Calvin Banks, left tackle, quarterback Quinn Ewers, and then Isaiah Bond at receiver was the other one that you would see every now and then on those early first-round mock drafts. I'll kick it to you first. How are these guys standing up? Are we all expecting these guys to hear their name early in the draft?
No doubt. Kelvin Banks, he was just selected SEC Offensive Lineman of the Week. He is no doubt. He's been a first-rounder since he was a freshman, and I think he still has solidified himself either as the top tackle or the second tackle. He's going to be drafted in the top 15, no doubt about it. So I think he has maintained, no question. Quinn, that Michigan game, that was maybe the best I've seen Quinn play against a defense that's going to have how many guys drafted in the first round? At least
they're going to have a lot too.
Maybe 3, and in terms of maybe 5 guys drafted overall. So trust me, NFL scouts, they saw what they needed to see from Quinn that game. He still got a big one coming up against Oklahoma because it's got a lot of NFL talent there too, and Georgia. But he's maintained as well. There's no doubt about it in my mind. I think he actually leapfrogged Shadur, but we'll see. I would have him over Shadur, but we'll see. We'll see how the season ends there. But those are your top 3: Carson Beck, Shadur, and Quinn. And as a race, Isaiah Bond, no doubt, he might have increased. It's like he's increased his draft stock. He might be in the other conversation about guys who exceeded their draft stock, increased it because early on, you're right, he was in some of those mocks. Now he's in every mock you look at in the first round, and they're saying he might be faster than Xavier Worthy. That's crazy.
That's exactly – I was going to go that exact route with Isaiah Bond because he is Texas's leading receiver in yards and in receptions. It feels like when Texas needs a big play, and we saw it at Alabama when he was there, when the Tide needed a big play, they would dial up Isaiah Bond, and he would come through in the clutch. And he's certainly silenced some of the question marks, I would say, about his hands and his reliability, right? That was kind of one of the big question marks after the spring, after we saw a drop in the end zone. We saw another drop over the middle. We're sitting there thinking, okay, what kind of weapon could he be for the Longhorns? We didn't know. And after hearing about maybe some inconsistencies in spring camp, well, I think those are all silenced right now. And when the lights are bright, he certainly comes to play. I did want to add one other name to this list because I did see the Isaiah Bond. He could be faster than Xavier Worthy. I'm not going to put that out there now.
I wouldn't either. I'm not betting on that.
Certainly not. And I'm not going to give a prediction on a 40-yard dash because the last time I did that, I looked pretty foolish as well. But there was one other name I wanted to add into this conversation as guys we thought were pretty darn good coming into the year, but now getting first-round grades on some mock drafts, some early predictions. Jahdae Barron. We saw his name on a first-round mock draft not too long ago. Is there a path for Jahdae to go in the first round? And if not, well, what could he do, Rod, to kind of squeak his name into that conversation?
Yeah, he's got to test well. He's got to test well. I think his film is going to be really appealing to a lot of NFL scouts, and the versatility now, right? The versatility, adding that to the mix. He's had a couple of snaps at safety. He's played nickel. He can play corner. NFL scouts love that too. So I think that being the, kind of the narrative about him now, that is helping his case and that's increasing his draft stock. He's got to test. What's the only thing we don't know about his straight line speed. I don't even know what Jahdae Barron. Where did he run coming out of high school? I don't know. I don't know if he's a track guy. I think that's the question with Jahdae. Does he have the kind of speed that can match up with a Jamison, Williams on the outside, or a Tyreek Hill, a Jalen Waddle on the outside at cornerback? Are we talking about putting him at a position where the elite speed doesn't matter as much? And by the way, I think he's got enough football intellect where he can make up for that, and he can play outside and play corner in the league. But that's going to be the question. That'll drop his draft stock and take it out of the first round. First round's for freaks, man. First round is for freaks. It ain't for good football players. Lots of good football players, better than guys who are drafted in the first round. Anthony Richardson went in the first round. He ain't a better football player than a lot of other guys, but the first round's for freaks. It is for freaks. And can he prove that he's freaky enough? I'm not sure.
One thing that Jahdae kind of goes against the grain in terms of defensive backs that Texas has had maybe in the past that are more athletic is he's football fast, right? Yeah. And maybe doesn't have or won't have – it remains to be seen, obviously, what his testing numbers are. But you watch the game film and you see, oh, that guy diagnoses, he reacts, and he sees things on the field very quickly, which for a defensive back in the NFL, very, very important.
Great.
All right, moving over to guys that have helped their draft stock. I think there's a handful of guys right now. And it certainly helps when you're 5-0 and you have a big win on the road against Michigan, and maybe you're surprising some folks offensively. I'll start with you, Rod. One guy right now that's really starting to, I think, surprise some folks after the start to this phase one of the Texas season.
It's hard to just pick one. It really is. I guess we can just go back and forth on this. So I'm sure a lot of these guys on your list too. I think the guy going first that's increased his draft stock, in my opinion, maybe the most, maybe is Jake Majors.
Yeah.
I think his game going up against Michigan and those D tackles and how Texas was able, they didn't manhandle them, but they handled them. And a lot of that was on Jake Majors, and I think he's getting a lot more love now. I'm starting to see that. And I'm not sure I thought of him as a guy that would get drafted. First of all, centers in position is hard to get drafted at.
It is.
Not a lot of centers are drafted, period. All right, that's just go look at. So we're looking at value of positions as well. And just not a lot of centers are drafted. And I think he turned himself into a guy where someone's going to draft him at center and to play in the NFL. And I thought to myself, when I first saw Jake Majors, maybe undersized, not sure if he can, play in the NFL. I think he can be a good player at the college level. I think he's changed my mind. I think this is what this part of the segment is for, guys who, I didn't think he was a guy that's going to get drafted, maybe play in the NFL, but not get drafted. Now I'm thinking, no, Jake Majors is going to get drafted because I think he's one of the best centers in college football right now.
I couldn't agree more. And again, SEC Offensive Lineman of the Week after that Michigan game going against Kenneth Graham, Mason Graham, two really darn good interior defensive linemen there. That's good point. I'm going to stay on the offense side of the ball. I'm going to go with Gunnar Helm. I've been very impressed with him as well. And I think after last year, when you see what was probably the most distinguished Texas tight end in recent memory with Jatavian Sanders. And, we saw bits and pieces of Gunnar Helm, but you didn't see him as the man outside of the Oklahoma game, in which Texas offensively, had some issues turning the ball over and whatnot. For Texas to now look at its tight end room and say, yeah, there wasn't a drop off after what was the most successful Texas tight end in recent memory. Again, that's a testament to Gunnar Helm. And he had that big touchdown against Michigan, up to 215 yards on the year. He's fourth in receptions right now, 13, almost 14 yards per reception. And Rod, we've seen the athleticism. And
yes,
again, another guy who you might look at and say it depends on the testing numbers for Helm, but then you watch the tape and you say, oh, he just hurdled two guys. Oh, he just, found a gap in the zone. Oh, he can run after the catch a little bit.
Yeah.
And he's, a contributor in the blocking game. For me, he's a guy that's helped himself tremendously. Honorable mentions here I wanted to also throw out. How about Vernon Broughton kind of playing himself into that conversation? He certainly helped himself with that strip sack against Mississippi State. I'm not saying he's going to be a day two guy or go super early in the draft, but I think he was on that undrafted free agency fringe coming into the year. And his strength specifically in the pass game as an interior guy, the quickness, and we've likened it a little bit in the past, Rod. He kind of feels like a cat to me, and we watch those videos all the time on social media of the cats kind of fitting into, a cup or a vase or a jar, and you're just like, their cats are like a liquid. Well, when he's pass rushing, he kind of has that liquidity to him of just being able to squeeze through gaps and get to the pass or the quarterback. So another guy that's rising up for me. Do you have anybody that we might have missed here?
No, man, I made a kind of a list, but I didn't, I don't want to go too in depth because I know we got some other ones we want to get to. But Helm was on my list too, because I'm with you. At the beginning of the season, I remember questioning whether he could win one-on-ones, right, and us thinking about, I don't know if he could get, some of his targets and some of his reps taken away because they brought in other players at the tight end position, which I'm sure we'll get to here in a second. But Helm is definitely one of the guys that made my list. And I threw out here, Barron Sorrell for me. I just every game, man, he doesn't necessarily make the splash plays every time, but he creates them with his presence. Resetting the line of scrimmage. He's great with his hands. He's your best DN edge rusher against the run. He's your best, and I think he is improved as a pass rusher. I want to go with Barron Sorrell because early on I wasn't sure if Barron Sorrell was a guy that NFL scouts will look at drafting, but you look at how he's transformed his body, and now you watch him in the SEC. I think he's got a chance to make himself some money because of the way he holds up against the run, more important, and plays multiple shades now. Johnny Nansen got him bumping inside on that NASCAR package, and he looks really good there. He does not look out of place. I'm throwing Barron Sorrell on my list too, man.
I like that one. Andrew Makuba deserves some love as well, a guy where you don't hear about him all too much, but certainly doing a fine job in the back end of that secondary for the Longhorns. All right, to phase 3 of this video, talking about the NFL draft and the Texas Longhorns for 2025. Maybe some guys who coming into the year, there were some higher expectations for right now. And I'll start off. I look at what Silas Bolden did at Oregon State a year ago coming in, and I saw, this could be year number 2 or 3 wide receiver, depending on what the formations and what the opponent was game planning against. Haven't seen a whole lot of him so far. Texas has tried to get him more involved, but coming off of a year where he had 750 or 800 yards with DJU throwing him the rock, I was thinking this could be a guy that comes in, makes an immediate impact for Texas, and then is off to the NFL. And so far, and again, it's only through phase 1 of the year, but I've been hoping to see more from him. Is there anybody that's standing out to you in that regard as well?
Yeah, everybody know how high I was on Trey Moore, and I still am, by the way. I still think Trey Moore is going to have a breakout game at one point here. But I'll admit the splash plays have not necessarily translated with Trey Moore. Watching him, you can tell that he's creating, he's affecting the quarterback, but this is a guy that had, double-digit sacks at UTSA, and I think the expectations were lofty that he was going to come in here and be able to do something similar, have a similar effect, and do phase 1. We haven't really seen it. So that's one. I think another one, I kind of referenced it earlier. I don't know what's happening with Amari Niblack. I have no idea. But I remember reading some of the some of the analysis about him and what his impact could be. And I watched him as a freakish pass receiver. I think some of his limitations as a blocker may have affected, his snaps. But I thought he would come in and have a bigger impact with the team, and then maybe a guy that could turn some heads. That's not the case.
Yeah, but on the bright side here, we just talked about an edge rusher, a wide receiver, and a tight end, in which we all just talked about guys who are boosting their draft stocks all at the same positions earlier in this video. So there's the trade-off, right? You have a lot of depth, you have a lot of talent. Someone will make
just phase one. Just phase one.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. So plenty of room for them to continue to improve moving forward. But big picture wise, and again, Texas coming off of the 2024 draft where there's 11 players drafted. You make the college football playoff. You have the second most players hear their name called, only behind the national champions, right? Michigan had 13, I believe. But now you're looking at a Texas roster, and yeah, there's still young talent. Manny Muhammad, Anthony Hill, Colin Simmons, not yet eligible for the NFL draft. But I think you're in a position right now to hear more names called this spring for the NFL draft than even what they were able to put into the NFL last year.
And that's interesting because we just talked about it. We won't get deep into it because I don't know. It would take a whole nother show. The guys who have increased their draft stock who aren't yet draft eligible.
Yeah.
Arch may be the one that's increased his draft stock more than anybody and not yet draft eligible. But you're right. I think it is possible. I mean, we can kind of go through it here, maybe player by player and see, in our opinion, who we think will get drafted and then what the number will get to. But I think they'll at least match their I think they'll get to double digits. That's safe, right?
I totally agree, especially offensively. I mean, we could go through that real quick. Quinn Ewers. I mean, yes. Yeah. Calvin Banks.
Yep.
Yes. Hayden Connor.
Ooh.
It's a lot of experience. A lot of experience on the offensive line. I'm just going right down the offensive line.
Yeah,
a lot of experience.
Okay.
We'll put him, maybe a fringe guy. Jake Majors. We just saw some mock drafts with him in the 3rd or the 4th round. DJ Campbell, 5-star guy. Perhaps a fringe guy. If the grade is right, he will be departing for the NFL. I believe that 100%. Now Cam Williams. Could he be a one and done? Or Jerry Hamilton has said that NFL scouts have taken a liking to him and the way that he started this year, especially after starting to hold his water a little bit better against some of those false starts. But right now, I think out of 6 possible guys, you're looking at 4.5, 5 guys maybe. And you got Gunnar Helm, who we mentioned. Then you start talking about wide receivers.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, your wide receivers might be Isaiah Bond in the 1st round, maybe. Matthew Golden. And then Silas Bolden, if he is a strong half, who knows? Who knows?
At least two
guys.
Yeah.
And then defensively, again, Makuba, Alfred Collins, Vernon Broughton. We've talked about them. Back end. I mean, you have so much talent right now. And again, it's all in what has been a pretty short turnaround from having 11 guys come in and be drafted a year ago.
Yeah, you're right. And that the big, I think what would tip the scales, you just brought up that O-line. Because you could have 2 guys that could decide to leave who we haven't really, thrown into the mix in our evaluation yet. Good point about Cam Williams. I've heard Jerry talk about that. He's got that kind of size where it's freakish size. All you got to do is see him. And they would be if you drafted a guy like Cam Williams early, you drafted him for the 2nd contract.
Yeah.
You basically are just drafting him as a developmental project early on. And then by the time he's a 2nd contract guy, he's a franchise left tackle. That would be the plan with that kind of size. That's interesting. Yeah.
It's pretty unique. And, normally when you see tackles go in the 1st round, you're expected them to hop right on in like a Joe Alt. And, you're expected to be the cornerstone of that franchise on the offensive line. What we've seen recently this year, Rod, is teams are taking that developmental, that slow, patient route with offensive linemen, right? The Jets took Olu Fashanu out of Penn State, and it took an injury to that offensive line in week 3 for him to get on the field. Again, for the Cincinnati Bengals, a very similar situation with Amarius Mims, who at Georgia, it has a very similar build to Cam Williams, only played 8 games, I believe, in one season, and then headed off to the NFL as a 1st rounder. So the path is there for him. And then, of course, with the way the NFL is working with, 2nd contracts and quarterbacks, I think Quinn, Calvin Banks, they're certainly in good spots to headline the draft for the Longhorns. But big picture-wise and kind of, pulling out the magic 8 ball and looking down to the future with the crystal ball, is 10 players drafted per year, is that attainable for the Longhorns when you consider the portal and now some of the guys that they're recruiting?
And NIL.
Yeah.
Don't forget about that. Yeah, because you can attract the best and you can pay the top prices for the best. And since the development is crazy, this would seem arrogant, but I do think it's possible because your development now is on track. Before, you was bringing in top talent, but your development was off. Now we haven't seen development this good. I mean, think about it. Some of your best players on your team right now are freshmen and young guys. Like
exactly,
right? Colin Simmons and Ryan Wingo and Anthony Hill. These are babies. Malik Muhammad. These are babies, and they're some of the best players on your team. That says a lot about the developmental rate now with this coaching staff. These guys, they're developing at a really high, fast pace. So, which means they're not staying 4 years. They're trying to get out in 3 now. It's a different era.
Yeah, it certainly is. And for Texas fans, it's a pretty darn fun one, I would say, especially when it comes to watching your team win on Saturdays, and then you get to turn on NFL Sundays and see all sorts of former players making plays, a la Xavier Worthy, Jordan Whittington, Roshan Johnson, Bijan. It's fun now, Rod, in the NFL for the Longhorns. But that'll do it for today, getting a little bit of a look ahead to the 2025 NFL Draft. Of course, for Rod Babers, thank you very much for your wisdom on the topic here. And, of course, I'm CJ Vogel. Come join us on ontexasfootball.com. We're covering the team, covering the draft. We'll have it all for you. But that'll do it for today. Hook 'em.
Hook 'em.